Hi, my name is Bella Carrasco, and helping others feel confident about investing brings a huge smile to my face. After working in the private equity, family office, and securities markets for nearly a decade, I am breaking down the world of money, investing, and financial freedom. Work optionality isn't a dream, it's a decision you make today. I bring you actionable tips, expert interviews, and enlightening strategies to help you get richer and stay that way. This is the How Do You Know podcast. And this podcast is for informational and educational purposes only and does not constitute financial advice. Please consult with a qualified financial professional for advice specific to your situation. The views and opinions expressed are those of the hosts and guests and do not necessarily reflect those of the podcast producers or sponsors. We make no representations or warranties regarding the accuracy or completeness of the content. Wealthy investors focus on legacy planning, which is different than a will or trust. So today we are speaking with Lance, who is a certified business development coach, as well as a certified behavioral consultant for DISC personality profiles. And Lance was a sales and leadership director and oversaw over 3,000 reps in 14 states for a Fortune 100 company prior to stepping out on his own in late 2018. Now has a book out, The Legacy Navigator, that we will dive into because not many think about planning for when they die, but it's a very critical piece that most people miss. So Lance, thank you for being here.
Jay, you having me. It's going to be fun.
Absolutely. Let's start with defining legacy planning.
Well, for me, there's so many different definitions out there. It's like if you Google it, you're going to come up with probably a million different options. But I was at a wealth creation conference probably close to 30 years ago, and the speaker gave his own unique definition that has never left me. And he says, legacy is that thing that refuses to be buried when you are. So that has just stuck with me. And there's been so many different speakers give different things about legacy and legacy planning. And when I worked in the high net worth space with some insurance companies, the thought of legacy planning and wealth transfer was almost a given as a synonymous act. And what this book digs into is that's only one leg of what we call the legacy table. Wealth is just one piece of the puzzle. So legacy is a lot more than transfer of money.
Right. And to your point, I think that quote really highlights that even though you have left this earth, there is still some parts of you, whether it's in the form of memory or finance, more tangible, you're still on the earth. And so there is a difference between a legacy plan and a will, which I think will be important to make the distinction between the two. So if you could just lay out in simple terms the differences, I think it would be helpful too.
A lot of people think that they don't have a will. And I think we've talked about that even offline. Everybody has a will. It's just a matter of, did they create it, or was it the one that the state created for them? So if someone passes away without a will, and from your space, it's called intestate. In other words, the state gets to determine what happens with all of your assets. And it doesn't matter if you have a 9-figure, 10-figure net worth, or you have very little. What you have will get designated to certain areas based upon either the will, as you've worded it, or based upon the state's wishes. A legacy is one of those things that I will have one, just like a will. You have one, whether it was one you created or not. For me, the legacy is one of those things that you either have an intentional one or you have the default one, because we all have a legacy. And to your point, when we leave this earth, we may physically leave, but our thoughts, our wishes, our family. Someone was telling me this morning, their resume is their children. And it's an empty nester. We have a men's group that we meet on Tuesday mornings, and it was just a confirmation that our resume really is built into our children. And we either love that definition or we hate it, depending on the relationship with our kids, right?
That's another interesting way to approach it, just from viewing from a different lens and having these conversations that aren't the most fun to have, but it's true that these different things are very relevant once you do pass away. And like you were saying earlier, we want to make sure that there are things in place, because if you leave without having a plan in place, then it just falls on to what the state says. And it can actually leave your family with more of a headache than you would
Oh,
want. So, at what
yep.
point do you think people should think about family legacy?
Yesterday, right? The best, I know you've heard this analogy, but the best time to plant a shade tree was 50 years ago. Well, we can't do much about 50 years ago, but the next best time is today. So yeah, the time to think about legacy plan, and I'll be 60 this year. I used to think 60 was so old,
Yeah.
right, Bella? It is not old anymore. Uh, but it's like I look at things totally different now. My children are 30, three boys, they're 36, 33, and 31. And I don't look at legacy planning as planning to die or what's going to happen when I die. For me, legacy planning is how am I going to live? I am going to live in a way that still models for my sons what does a successful marriage looks like. We've
Yep.
been married 37 and a half years. Not all has been rosy and fun. Marriage is hard. I know you're
Yep.
engaged. So, but it is the most rewarding thing out there. But it takes work. And you said, something you said triggered too. I have a phrase or a teaching concept. It's like choose your inconvenience. I know
Yeah.
Steve Harvey has his talk about choose your hard. I just do a little twist on it. It's like choose your inconvenience. It is inconvenient to be a great husband or a great spouse. It is
Yeah.
inconvenient to be an intentional, engaged parent. But the inconvenience is far greater if you don't think about what does it mean to be a good spouse, or how do I
Yep.
intentionally invest in my kids. If
Yep.
I don't intentionally invest, the inconvenience I'll deal with later is far greater than if I'm willing to be inconvenienced today to be engaged and intentional as a father. And
Exactly.
that's really what
That's
the book is all about.
Yes, intentional is my favorite word out there, because even though we wish life was this straight linear line, I'm always telling my sisters life goes up, then it goes down, then it goes back up. So you have to learn how to
Yeah.
roll with those punches and be intentional about those moments where you're low, because the high moments are easy. Anyone can get through those, but it's the moments when you're not feeling great, your relationship isn't as great as you want it to be. Those are the moments where, in your words, are you're inconvenienced or you have to put the work in. And it's hard, but we're all just so different. And so, because of those differences, that's what makes us great. But at the same time, that's when communication is so important, because everyone's thinking a little bit differently. And you might be, like you said, inconvenienced at times, but that's what it takes to make a successful relationship work, whether it's a friendship, a romantic partner, or with your kids or other family members.
Or business or leaving your legacy. But
Mm-hmm.
do you remember the story in the book with the comparison between Jonathan and Sarah Edwards and Max
Mm.
Jukes?
Oh,
Jonathan and Sarah Edwards had 11 children, and in the book it lays out what was Jonathan Edwards doing as a dad. I don't know how he had time to do it, but apparently every evening when he got in, he spent at least a little bit of one-on-one time with each child. My
wow.
mind is like, I only had three, and
Yeah.
spending one-on-one time with just those three was, you had to be highly intentional. And that is one of my favorite words as well. But he was highly intentional about investing in and spending time with his children every evening, and then prayed over them every night. But that was their family's intentional side. They were willing to be inconvenienced to invest in those 11 kids. And in the book, somebody uh, did 150-year study of what was the lineage of Jonathan and Sarah Edwards. And it is literally a who's who of success. There
Mm.
were politicians, which I know that is that successful or not today. It's a who knows. But anyway, um, theological seminary, college presidents, judges, attorneys, highly successful people of corporate structures. It was literally a who's who of 150-year span. Now we compare that to Max Jukes, and there's not a whole lot on him other than he was a self-proclaimed atheist. They don't know who his
Mm.
wife was or how many women that he had, but he also had I think it was 9 children, but he had absolutely nothing to do with his kids. And when you look at the 150-year lineage of his legacy, because again, he had one, it was the default version. And his is 180 degree from what Jonathan and Sarah Edwards were. The state of New York did a study a number of years back to find out what was the impact of Max Jukes' family. And one of the articles said that there was not one positive person that came out of his lineage, which I don't
Wow.
want that as my legacy. And it cost the state of New York over $1 million in just people that were in prison, the red light district, death row, and those were
Wow.
in old, $1,800. So several, or maybe tens of millions of dollars that Max Jukes' lineage cost the state of
Mm,
New York. He wasn't intentional. He wasn't
right.
willing to be inconvenienced. And look at the inconvenience that it created for everyone else. So back to,
Sure.
you will have a legacy. It's a matter of, was it the one you wanted to create, or was it the default version?
Right. And it's hard. It takes work, like we were just alluding to, but those are really hard examples to ignore. On one hand, you have someone who was that intentional father, spent time with his 11 kids, which, to your point earlier, you were saying, how do I even have time for three? But if he made time for
No.
11, anyone can do this.
Right.
Versus someone who didn't take the time to do that, maybe because it is hard or I don't have time or excuse this and excuse that. But I love that comparison because it's such a stark contrast. Do you have any idea of why you think it works?
Yeah. Well, if we can, I think it goes back to what we call the 4 legs or the legacy table in the book, right?
Hmm.
When we talk about legacy transfer, the vast majority of the population, I promise you, they think it's about wealth transfer. And their first thought is, I may not have a vast amount of wealth, so I don't need to worry about it. But when we think about legacy transfer, there are actually 4 legs to the table. And the thing I love about the book and the feedback that we're getting is so good because it makes it simple. When people don't know where to begin, they choose to do nothing, right? If they feel
Hmm.
overwhelmed or lost, it's not that they don't care. It's just they don't know where to begin. If they don't know where to begin, they don't begin. But the first leg that we talk about in the book is the transfer of vision. So leg 1
Hmm.
is transfer of vision. Leg 2 is transfer of values. Leg 3 is transfer of knowledge. And finally, the 4th leg is wealth transfer. So why does it work? I believe that as a patriarch, it is my responsibility, and my wife is very, very engaged and intentional as well. But there's an adage, and I'm sure you've heard of it: without a vision, people perish. Without another, maybe common modern day phrase is, without vision, people get lost. They
Yep.
get off track. They go astray. So if we're able to, or when we're able to create vision and direction for our family, that begins to instill in them, one, that it's important to have a vision, to know where they want to go. Now, all 3 of my boys, it wasn't a matter of, are they going to go to college? My generation, it was, you're going. You just need to decide
Hmm.
where. So all 3 of them went, but about 2 years in, they all bailed. At about the same time, they're 5 years apart between the oldest and the youngest, but they got about 2 years in and decided, they're forcing me to learn things I don't want to learn. I don't care to
Hmm.
learn, and it's going to take me too long to get where I want to go. So somewhere around the 2.5 year mark, all 3 of my sons, they quit school and they hired coaches and they hired consultants to help them grow a business. And I'm
Mm.
convinced that part of that was because they saw their dad hiring coaches back when, 20 years ago, coaches weren't, that wasn't a real popular thing. That's, there's so many coaches in the world today. I go to a networking event, and it seems like about a third of the people there, they're calling themselves a coach, and they may very well be, but there's no real diploma for you to get to say, oh, I'm a coach. And that's fine. But being intentional about creating vision for them has created a trajectory for them to be able to follow. What about your values? There's a great exercise in the back of the book called the core values exercise. And it's a very easy thing to discuss, but it's not that easy to do. I've had a lot of clients that go through the exercise. The husband, he works through his list, gets it down to 5. The wife gets hers down to 5. And then together, out of those 10, I'm asking them to now combine their list of 10 and create 5 out of that. Talk about inconvenient. It's not easy to do, but when you're willing to do that as a parent and you begin to cast vision about what you stand for and you create family values, this is all beginning to instill themselves into that next generation. And if we're not intentional on helping paint the path or create a trajectory for them, someone else will. So I think that's the reason it works, is because you're intentional and you're giving them good quality advice. And then that third leg, transfer of knowledge, I have a huge list of what did I want my boys to know how to do or to know about before they left home. That's got to be intentional. And I teach that with all my clients, is you've got to know what you want to transfer. Vision, values, knowledge. The wealth, there's an entire industry that's built up around transferring wealth. So that's pretty easy to do. But the first 3, you can't outsource. You've got to take care of that yourself.
Yes, I am a big believer in making sure that you have a roadmap or a vision set up first, because the example I always use is if you're going from California to Florida, sure, you can get there, but it might take you a little bit longer. You might get lost, what you were alluding to. But if you have your route planned out, you will get there faster, more efficiently, less headaches, etc. along the way. And to your point earlier as well, doing all of this planning can feel overwhelming, but I do like the way
Yeah,
that you've laid out the book because, for example, you were talking about the values exercise. It just makes it a lot more approachable. Okay, I get 5, my partner gets 5, then we come together. And that part might
yeah,
take a little bit longer, but it's way easier to have an action plan in that sort of realm rather than not even knowing where to start. So just little tips like
right.
that throughout the book I thought were very nicely laid out. But going back to this concept of feeling overwhelmed, what do you think is a good first step people should take in legacy planning? Is it the vision and value exercise?
I do. And again, we come back to when people don't know the next step, they honestly don't take the next step, not in that direction or
Hmm.
that lane. It's very inconvenient to become intentional, right? We've talked about that. We're probably, you and I, we could tear up that word in a positive way and use it over and over and over and over. But when we're intentional, we will get things done. And
Hmm.
not to falsely promote the book, but the book does lay it out so simply that it's almost giving you a roadmap or a blueprint on, if I don't know really what to do, where can I start? Because at the end of each chapter, if you remember, it has the highlights, the things that I want you to really pull out of that
Hmm.
chapter. And then it'll have 2 or 3 exercises, implementation pieces. So, okay, you read the chapter. Here are the highlights. Now, what are the exercises that I can do? So it literally helps people walk through, what do I do to even get started? And I
Yep.
think that's what makes this different than most books. There's not a whole lot of books on legacy. There are a few, but this one's relatively short. On Audible, it's only 3-hour listen. Yeah, and there's the free downloads that goes with that. But having
Yeah.
that as a blueprint makes it so much simpler to follow through.
Very doable for sure. And I actually listened to a podcast recently that said if you're reading books or listening to podcasts or watching YouTube videos, but you're not regularly visiting what you learned or you're not or you just kind of forget about it, then that's really just entertainment. You're not really educating yourself if you're not actually implementing it in your life. So, the
So
even
true.
if you read your book and you don't touch it for a few months or years, you can always go back to those the end of the chapters like you were saying and find those action steps, find the exercises that go along with it so that you can actually
Yeah,
implement it into your life, which is amazing. That was definitely one of my favorite parts.
excellent. Well, thinking about you and your fiance, if we go back to that core values exercise, uh, when you pick your 5 and they pick their 5, and honestly, this is a great time for you and him to do this because you're you're not been married for years or decades. I've got clients, they've been married for 15, 20, 25 years, and going through this exercise is allowing the spouse to see into that person more than they ever
Right.
have.
Absolutely. Yes. There's also another concept in the book that you talk about is silver sword versus gold sword. Do you mind touching on
Mm.
that a little bit too?
Yeah, that was kind of one that it was kind of a slap in the face because it was one of those things. I was new to the corporate world and I was climbing the corporate ranks because I just love leadership. I love everything about leadership. John Maxwell is one of my mentors, and he's like, everything rises and falls on leadership. So I wanted
Hmm.
to be a great leader at the corporate level, and for some reason, it felt easier to be a leader at the corporate level than to leading my own home. I know that's an indictment on me, but as a young leader, I was all about growth and providing for my family. And what I learned is in this book that we give the story in there, but the silver sword is what we swing at work. It's polished stainless steel. It's incredibly sharp on both sides. I mean, it is a tool that we use to get things done in the corporate place usually. And what I found is when I would walk into my house, I kept, it was a visual that I had, but if I kept the silver sword on my hip, when I came walking in ready to swing the silver sword, what I was met with was a wife. We're both firstborns. And I realized very quickly she had her own silver sword. And before you knew it, I might not have been home but just a few minutes. And we're swinging swords at one another, which was not the
Hmm.
plan. But when you come into the house with the mindset of, I've been making decisions all day and I'm going to continue making decisions all night, and then you have a strong willed wife, in my case, that had her own silver sword, I mean, we could have sparks fly pretty quickly. And there was a book, I think it was an old book, probably, I think it was called The Hidden Value of a Man, which is where I found that. He's the one that built this and created a visual for me that saw that if I would stop at the threshold of my door, I don't, that's not a word we use a whole lot, but stop at the door before I walk into the house. And I would go through the physical motion of unstrapping the silver sword, hanging it up on the peg, pulling the gold sword off, strapping it on. The difference
Hmm.
between the silver sword and the gold is a much softer metal. And if I come into the house swinging the gold sword, it's going to be easily damaged and deteriorate the value of it. So, but what I noticed is when I walked in the house knowing I was carrying the silver sword, I wasn't as quick to swing it. I was much
Hmm.
more gentle with it. And what was amazing is when I physically saw myself carrying the gold sword into the house, I ended up finding that my wife was also using the gold sword. So I would be able to set the tone of what was going to be like in my home when I would come in that evening. If I carried the silver one in, I was met with a silver sword. If I carried the gold one in, I was met with a gold sword. So a lot of what we do, it's just so mindset based.
Hmm.
If I don't think about what I'm thinking about, which is metacognition, if I don't think about what I'm thinking about, then I have no awareness. And if I have no awareness, I can't adjust for it. But if I'm not aware of it, I can't adjust for it. Does that make sense?
I'm also a firstborn, so I can also come in swinging my silver sword. And I also heard someone speak a few months back that talked about your first act and your second act. So when you get out of the office, it's like, okay, time for act two, because your family still deserves the
Mm,
energy that they deserve as well. But coming with your silver
that's
sword
good.
attitude isn't going to exactly foster successful relationships within the family. So I love having that
True.
visual, whether it's the swords or the axe or whatever it is for anyone. But some people might say like, okay, great, but what does this have to do with financial success? But in my opinion, they go hand in hand because you need successful relationships in order to
Oh,
A, have financial success, but then B, the point of this podcast episode is have that legacy plan in place for yourself. So it all feeds off of each other, in my opinion.
yeah, I agree. Definitely agree.
And you touched on a little bit of your corporate background. I know you were going to write about sales and leadership. So, what is a top tip you'd give those in sales?
Wow, man, I love sales. I love leadership. I used to tell the boys when they were growing up, and this is not a negative or an indictment against anyone that makes an hourly wage. Everybody has a plan and a purpose. But what I
Hmm.
used to tell the boys was if you really, really wanted to make a good living, you had to either be in sales or you had to own your own business. I was fortunate that in the corporate world, I was able to climb the ranks, which kind of acted as golden handcuffs. So I got to the point where I was making good money. I was making too good to just leave and start my own thing. And that happened, until I was 53. 53, I finally left corporate. But I used to tell the boys that you either be in sales or you own your own company, because in sales, there was no limit. There was no cap on how much money you could make. But what I noticed is when I was on the sales leader side, what I noticed is that you could have a certain position in sales, and I would have two different individuals. One of them would have the greatest income and the greatest freedom and the greatest joy. And this other person was in the exact same role. They would have the lowest amount of income, most frustration, and less freedom. So sales is one of those things. It is what you make it. Not everybody is great in sales, but everybody can get better in sales. So the top thing on sales is, first of all, having a desire to help people. When I am able to help people, then I'm not looking at making a sale. Just a real quick story on that. When I first started in sales, it was in college, and it was the hardest sales role I ever had in my life. But it was selling china and crystal, long stem crystal, at apartment complexes.
Oh my gosh!
To college students. Exactly. It was hard. So definitely got used to having doors slammed in my face and being told no. Move that forward a few years, and I started with a life insurance company. And we grew up really, really poor. And so the opportunity to make really good money was something new to me. And so everybody I saw as a dollar sign. I did not have a healthy view of sales initially. And I remember this one couple that I sold a life insurance policy to them on October 1st. I know this wasn't in any of our notes. This just thought hit my head. On October 1st, and on October 31st, this was in Shreveport, Louisiana, they were out walking around, and the husband was randomly shot and killed in a drive-by shooting.
Oh my gosh.
The policy hadn't issued yet, but because he had done all of his medical requirements, the company I was with, they did issue the policy. So around November 4th, 5th, somewhere in there, I delivered a death claim. I delivered money to this widow. She was 24, and she had a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old little girl. I was now delivering money. She was able to stay in her home until it was sold at a normal price instead of having to fire sell it. And she went back to nursing school and started a whole new career. After that moment, I never saw selling life insurance the same. Before that, every policy I sold, I saw it as a way that I'm going to win that trip to Hawaii. I'd never been to Hawaii. So my focus was solely selfish. It really was. After that event, I saw what it actually did. And regardless of whether it's pharmaceutical, dental, ink, I've got some clients that sell ink or janitorial supplies. When we look at sales as a way that we are solving problems, I can make a great career in sales because I am solving people's problems. I am serving people. So first tip is I look at it as you cannot have what I call commission breath. You can't look at everybody you talk about or talk to as a way to make money. What problem are you solving? And that makes all the difference in the world. It is obvious. You can see it, you can smell it, right? You know if somebody's trying to make a sale. The second thing is starting anything new will take work. It takes a lot of work to be in sales, and you got to be willing to pay the price. So that's kind of in a nutshell. First and foremost, you got to do it as a way to serve people.
Right. Yeah, those are great tips because like we were just alluding to, there's such a difference between when someone you can just tell is nagging at you, but not in a way that you feel is helping you. It's just they just want the commission. Whereas if you are leading with genuine curiosity and interest, that is just a better experience overall. So I appreciate you sharing those. I know you also started off by commenting on your sons who are very well accomplished. What a part of legacy planning would you attribute their accomplishment to?
Mm. Well, I think first of all that we talked about their experience in college, and everything is more easily caught than taught. I know you've heard that phrase before. If I'm telling them to do one thing and then I do another, I just create confusion for them. But when I'm telling them this is what you should do, and then they can watch dad do those things when there's an alignment between what I say to do and what I'm actually doing, that creates a much, much greater impact. So that's first thing. The other thing that I have learned later in life, I wish I'd have learned this a lot earlier. So any of your younger listeners, no relationship, no influence.
Mm-hmm.
To the extent I want to have influence with my teenagers, now my adult children, my grandchildren, I put relationship first. That doesn't mean that I blow everything else off, but no relationship, no influence. And so being intentional about having a good relationship with them was vital. When I got into coaching, I was still with corporate, and I used my coaching training to train the corporate agents, but I also treated my sons as my very first client. So
Mm-hmm.
I met with them weekly and we talked about unique strategies. There's something we talk about in the book called the Family Vision Cast. We've done that since they were probably 13. So that's probably 25 plus years, but it's a year in vision cast. The framework is in the book. I definitely encourage folks to look at doing something like that. But it's a quick and easy thing. It doesn't have to be as elaborate as what it turned out to be. After doing it for 30 years, it got more and more complex. Just being intentional about equipping your kids to think for themselves, to be able to think critically, to be able to problem solve. So all of that was just like what I did is I took all of the resources that corporate gave me to train all those sales reps,
Mm-hmm.
and I put a personal spin on it and brought it into our family vision cast. And so at the end of each year, I did the corporate version from all my sales reps, but we did one as a family and just tweaked the names to the verbiage to make it more personal than business.
It goes back to your second sales tip that you just touched on, and the theme that we've been talking about throughout this whole episode is it takes work. You have to be intentional. You're going to be inconvenienced. It's easy to take the easy route, but it's hard to actually do the things that you need to be doing to be successful. So I hope
Yeah.
that's the message that people are receiving today. And I know when you think about legacy planning or financial planning, the first thought that might come up is a financial advisor. So do financial advisors carry these components out for people, or is this something that should really be done on your own?
Yes, to both. I've about half of my one-on-one clients are financial advisors, and
Mm-hmm.
they take their role as far as financial planning to a degree of more towards legacy planning. What do you, beyond money, what do you want to leave for your family? So can a financial advisor do these things? Absolutely. There are some that are way on down the road as far as helping people create intentional legacies. And there are some financial advisors that were still in their 40s, 50s, 60s. They're still like I was when I was in my 20s. And it's a status. How much money can I
Sure.
make? What trips can I win? So I think can go either way. Can financial advisors carry the mantle of this type of leadership? 100%, I believe they can. Does everyone? They don't. So it's up to
Right.
that
I'm sure
person.
it would take a little bit of work to find a financial advisor that would be aligned in that way.
Good, absolutely.
Is there anything you want to leave anyone with?
One, be willing to be inconvenienced for the right
Mm-hmm.
cause. So that means that we have to know, what are we willing to fight for? If you're married, it's worthwhile to fight for the marriage. One thing in doing some studies, I've got working on another book now. Um, what I've learned is there is a 40% spike in the divorce rate at empty nest.
Wow.
We know what the divorce rate is countrywide anyway, but to think that there is a 40% spike at empty nest, what does that tell us? Well, that tells us that probably the last 5 to 7 years that the children are in the house, both mom and dad are purely focused on going to all the kids' events, whether it's school,
Right.
sports, music, academic, and we begin to lose that connectivity of the marriage. And then when the final child is out of the house, you've got two roommates and they don't know how to bring things back together. So,
Hmm.
first thing is be intentional, be aware, and be willing to be inconvenienced. I think if I could sum it up, that's really what I would say is those three things are, I mean, marriage, you're getting ready to get into it. It's fantastic. It takes work, but it's
Yep.
worth it.
Yes, hammering that message home, hopefully.
Hopefully. Yeah.
Why and how should people reach out to you?
Well, the why is my wife and I have a podcast as well. It's called Beyond the Nest, and it specifically talks about parenting leading into empty nest. So we have a lot of fun with that. People get to see how strong-willed my wife is, and I mean, together we banter. We're real life. We're transparent. We talk about things on there that probably most people wouldn't. That we just feel like that's our call. We're supposed to be transparent and let people know that, you know what, there's real struggles in marriage, and this is what we did to help overcome that. So I would definitely encourage people to check out the podcast Beyond the Nest. Uh, People that are entrepreneurs and want to grow or scale, I do have some coaching spots that are available either through group or for one-on-one. But more than anything, I would really love for people to pick up the book because it is a resource. It's not an expensive tool, but it is a resource to help people become highly intentional especially when they don't know where to start. This book lays it out so simply that it gives them step one, step two, step three through all 14 chapters.
I couldn't agree more.
All
I
that.
think it's a great book, and I think especially in today's society where everyone's on social media trying to portray their lives as this perfect life that they have, having a conversation with you and your wife on your podcast where you're just talking real talk, I think is probably very refreshing for a lot of people.
Hope so. Hope so. My website has got a lot of free resources on it, thelancewelch.com. Scroll down towards the bottom for couples that are married. There's one form specifically that I'd look at, and it's called the First Friday Discussion Guide. It is one of the things that I've probably recommended more often than anything else over the last 20 some years. But when I traveled all the time with corporate, we found that if we weren't intentional on getting on the same page, or at least in the same book, we weren't. And
Yep.
when we're not in the same page or the same book, that's when unmet expectations or miscommunications happen. And when those two things happen, arguments flare. So the First Friday Discussion Guide is just what it says. On the first Friday of every month, my wife and I, we go somewhere from like 2:30 to 5:30, and it's basically a glorified business meeting. We talk everything from kids, calendars, schedules, serving at church, any couples dinners or anything that we have going on. We talk budget. We can talk finance, network. It gets into the weeds. So it's a
Mhm.
free resource. I would definitely encourage people to go out and download that one. There's others on there too that are really good, but that one it seems to help more people, more marriages get and stay on the same page than anything else that's out there.
I do something similar. We usually do it on Sundays, but it's funny how if you don't get into that regular rhythm of it, something feels off. And then when you finally
Yeah,
get back into it, you're like, okay, it's definitely something that should be prioritized.
good for you. Good to hear that.
Well, let's end with my quick three-question fire round. First one is, what is your favorite restaurant?
Well, my favorite restaurant is Lance's House. I do
Yeah.
the best reverse seared steak out there. We love it. But as far as going out,
Yum.
there's a little place about 30 minutes from here called Mama Mila's. The best little Italian place. It is so good. So next time you're in Nashville, shoot me a text and I'll tell you where it is. It's down in Columbia, but it is so good. Mama Mila's.
Okay, that's great. Well, next time I'm maybe coming over for some steak too. So
Okay, that'll work.
Second question is, if you were given $1 million, how would you invest it today?
Oh man, there's so many things. The very first thing though is I would carve out 10 to 15% and give it to charity.
Mm-hmm.
There is something called the law of generosity that you just cannot outrun. So the first thing is through that is generosity. Then I'd get with a good financial advisor that understood my values, and I would trust them. I am not the financial advisor anymore, so I would definitely get with somebody else who really knows what they're doing.
Sure, sure. Last question is, what is your favorite piece of media to stay up to date on the news?
Oh, I have a love-hate relationship with media and news. So this is going to sound weak, but I rely on my wife. She is an
There you
amazing
go.
researcher, and anything that I really need to know, she keeps me up on that. Telegram is probably one of the better sources. We stay away from the mass media sites; just don't trust it. But my best news source is Allison Welch. Honestly,
That's great. No, a lot of people either don't watch it or have similar ways. They don't like, oh yeah, I'll just hear it from someone else. If it's important enough, I'll figure it out somehow. So it's not as uncommon as you might think.
good, awesome.
Well, Lance, thank you again for being on. I hope people really understand the importance of intentionality and all the topics we discussed today. Until next time, adios.
Thank you much. Bye.
Thank you for tuning in today. If you found any value and want to support the podcast, I would be forever grateful if you texted someone the link. You can say that you have a podcast episode that may be interesting for them. Also, if you have questions or topics you want covered, please don't hesitate to reach out on LinkedIn or Instagram. Remember that every step makes a difference. I hope that you continue to learn how to get richer and stay that way.